To discuss the latest, we're joined in studio by Lisa Ruth, a former CIA analyst and current analyst with LIGNET, and also joining us by phone, Professor Alan Dershowitz. We thank you both for joining us on America's Forum. Alan, first to you. Yesterday, we had James Zogby from the Arab Institute with us, and he gave an answer to a question that merits a response to you. And I want to get to that in just a moment. But given what is breaking with the news here, Lisa, I have to ask you from an intelligence standpoint, what we are seeing right now in Israel. Can you unpack for us this rapid fire culmination of events?
Sure, and as I think we're aware, this has all escalated since the kidnapping and murder of the three young Israeli teenagers a couple weeks ago. That was retaliation. They kidnapped and burned alive the Palestinian teenager. Since that time, we've seen some pretty severe escalation. Israel's launching airstrikes. They're now, as you see, talking about a ground invasion. Hamas has launched rocket attacks. It's interesting from a political situation because Netanyahu has certainly been getting pressure from the hawks within his party to do more. We've seen some unbundling of that, and I think this is a response to that pressure.
Alan, you just heard Lisa, and of course you were very gracious with your time. We thank you for it this morning, but when you last joined us, Alan, we were really talking about Israeli politics and the challenge of coalition governments. Lisa says it's pressure on Netanyahu that in part has led to what I guess we would call a muscular response. Does that square with the attitude you found in Israel a few weeks ago when you sat down for dinner with the Prime Minister?
Absolutely not. It's not the pressure from internal politics. It's the pressure from Hamas. Hamas wanted this. We have to step back even a few months prior to the kidnapping and tragic killing of the three Israelis. When I was in Israel, I was taken to the terrorist tunnels that Hamas builds between Gaza and Israel. They build these tunnels, and they're architectural marvels. They're 7 feet tall. They're concrete. They build them for one purpose, not to smuggle goods. You don't smuggle goods in from Israel. They build them for only one purpose, and that is to kidnap and kill Israelis. This particular tunnel that I was in exited just a few yards away from a kindergarten with 57 Jewish children in a kibbutz. The goal of Hamas is to build as many tunnels as possible, kidnap and kill as many Israelis as possible. That's a long-term policy. There are many of those tunnels. Israel has found only a couple of them. They're very, very difficult to find. So the kidnapping of the three and the murder was a culmination of a long Hamas policy of trying to kidnap and kill Israeli civilians. That's coupled with a policy of sending rockets now to Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. I ask any American to ask themselves the question, what would they want their government to do if rockets were raining on New York City and Miami Beach and Chicago, and if some alien enemy country were building tunnels to kidnap our children from kindergartens? So what Israel's doing is a relatively moderate response. Not only is it a targeted attack on Hamas military targets, but they accompany it with leaflets that they drop in Arabic, telephone calls, noise bombs that warn everybody to get out of the area, that here's a military target, a building that's being used to send rockets. It's going to be destroyed within half an hour. Get out of the building. Most people get out of the building. Some people choose to remain as human shields, and inevitably there are going to be some civilian casualties. Hamas loves civilian casualties. I call it the dead baby strategy. They are ready to have their babies killed and held up for the news to report so as to give Israel a black eye. Israel has no choice. It must protect its citizens against these rockets, against these tunnels, and against these kidnappings. Any democracy would do the same. And the world has to judge Israel by the same single standard it would judge any other democracy by. And it must judge Hamas by the same single standard of being an aggressive terrorist organization that is determined to destroy Israel's right to exist as the nation state of the Jewish people.
Lisa, Alan just outlined in no uncertain terms what Israel is facing from his purview. And we talked militarily about the airstrikes and the rocket attacks. The Prime Minister's also called up 40,000 troops. Do you believe a ground offensive is inevitable in this situation?
And I go back to what Professor Dershowitz said. You're dealing with an escalated situation, and you mentioned the tunnels, and they did just find another tunnel, and some Hamas people were blown up in the process. I think that you're dealing with a situation, and I know that I read this morning that there are efforts to get al-Sisi in Egypt to try to de-escalate the situation. But at this point, you are talking about an escalation that requires an escalated response. And I think that the ground offensive, unless something dramatic happens to de-escalate, that's where we're moving.
I don't agree necessarily. I think the 40,000 troops that are called up are a deterrent. It's a message to Hamas that Israel is ready to send in ground troops, perhaps even reoccupy Gaza, as it has a perfect right to do. A military occupation of an enemy who is sending in rockets is perfectly legitimate morally and legally. I don't think that Netanyahu, I know him well, I've known him for 40 years, is anxious to send Israeli 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds into harm's way in Gaza. But he's prepared to do it if necessary, and the next step is up to Hamas. If Hamas continues to send the rockets toward Jerusalem and Tel Aviv particularly, there's no choice but to send in ground troops. If they stop, if they are affected by the deterrence, then hopefully this can end in a more peaceful way.
Alan, we mentioned at the outset of our time together something that was said yesterday on our air. James Zogby from the Arab Institute joined us here on America's Forum. We played something you had to say a couple of days ago, a comment you made: Israel wants peace but also wants security. We're going to listen now to what James Zogby had to say, and we'll get your reaction following listening to Mr. Zogby's comment.
Look, Alan Dershowitz is a great defense lawyer for guilty clients.
Alan, that prelude, he went on to talk about both sides seeking balance, seeking peace and security, but that verbal volley sent your direction, merited some comment. That's why we've asked you back.
Well, I wish Zogby would be a little bit more original. Let me read you from a statement he made on January 4th, 2009, on a CNN broadcast. Quote, to me, quote, "You're a great lawyer for guilty clients, Alan." I mean, he's been making this charge now for, 5 years. At least let him come up with something original. If he has no better answer than an ad hominem like that, we have a real problem. On that same show, he said that, quote, "Hamas is wrong. They have been wrong. Even before this all began, they have been wrong. Alan, I'm not going to shill for Hamas." So, Zogby has to defend, quote, his clients, and of course he represents Arab Americans. He has to defend his clients, but not by the use of ad hominem, not by calling me names, not by saying I'm a defense lawyer, but on the merits. And I challenge Zogby to debate me on the merits. I promise I will, if he stops lying about me, I'll stop telling the truth about him. And that'll be a fair debate. So why don't you invite me on. We'll have a debate on the merits without calling each other names, and let's see what the American public thinks, whether they're prepared
to
defend
we will take
rocket
you up.
attacks or whether they're prepared to defend the right of a democracy like Israel to defend itself by proportional and reasonable means.
Well, it may be, Alan, and for purposes of full disclosure, you and I, in my previous lifetime in Congress, on occasion on television, would have some words. But apart from that, once we get past the ad hominem, to Zogby's point where he says that peace and security is needed for both sides, perhaps that's a legitimate area where we won't so much have verbal fireworks, but some agreement. So in the spirit of your invitation, we will ask James Zogby to join us and to join you right here on America's Forum, and we look forward to that debate and want to thank you very much for your time there. Now, sure. Alan, before we let you go, Sarah Palin had some comments on the border issue concerning the illegals who are under the age of 18. She says they should be deported. We have less than a minute. Do you believe there should be deportation of the illegal minors crossing our southern border?
Absolutely not. We're a country of immigrants. We will benefit enormously by having people coming into this country who have energy and determination. If everybody in America looks back at their own families, we will find many illegal immigrants in our backgrounds, whether we're Irish Americans or Jewish Americans or Greek Americans or Japanese Americans. America thrives on immigration, and we should not be deporting young children back to certain death or certain difficulties in life. We should be welcoming them with open arms.
Alan Dershowitz weighing in on a variety of issues. Lisa Ruth from LIGNET, we thank you very much. We invite you to check out lignet.com for updates on intelligence, and we are coming back on America's Forum.